Value analysis, okay. What we do in value-added analysis is we try and identify. We go through those business process models that we created. So this presupposes we actually have a textual description of the business process, or we actually have a BPMN diagram. And what we try and do is identify any unnecessary steps in a process. And the purpose of doing that, of course, is to eliminate unnecessary steps. So here's an example. Again, my mouse is playing up. Here's an example. For a task, if we want to check an invoice, okay, so somebody has bought something from us, we're going to send out an invoice. To check an invoice, we retrieve a purchase order, okay, that corresponds to the invoice. So somebody's obviously ordered something. So to check the invoice, we've got to go back to the purchase order and check it against the invoice. We checked that the amounts in the invoice and those on the purchase order are the same. We checked that the products or the services that people have ordered on the purchase order have actually been delivered. And we checked that the supplier's name and the banking details on the invoice are the same as those recorded in the supplier management system. So they're checks we have to do. And they're just fairly simple checks for an invoice. It's a fairly mundane task. What we want to identify, we need to identify the customer of the tasks. So given a business process model, obviously there's a customer of a business process. So we need to identify the customer of the task and make sure that any of the steps here are adding value for the customer. So they're valuating. So are these all valuating? Some steps won't directly add value to the customer, but they might be necessary for the business to undertake these, to fulfill the business process, in which case these might be business valuating. And some steps which aren't valuating or they're not business valuating are non-valuating steps. So we classify the steps or the tasks we undertake into either valuating, business valuating, or non-valuating. These two are okay. This one down here is not okay. As I said, something that directly adds value to the customer is fine. Sometimes there's steps we have to undertake which don't directly add value to the customer, but they're needed for the business in order to continue to do the tasks that it has to do. Business valuating, non-valuating ones, they're the ones we want to get rid of. And that's what the ultimate aim is in value-added analysis. So what we need to do is decodicate the process into various stages. So given this process, example, check an invoice, okay, we decodicate it into 3 stages. We want to classify the steps. We want the steps performed before a task is undertaken. We need to classify it into other things into the task itself. And then possibly that task might be decomposed into smaller steps. And then what are the steps performed after a specific task in preparation for the next task? So if you remember in a business process model, it consists of a whole series of tasks. So there's things we need to do before we execute the task. Maybe we're waiting for a message to come in. Things we need to do in the task itself, which might be then further broken down into further subtasks. And there's things we do after the task is done, and that might be after a task is done, send a message off to somewhere. So we need to classify each step. Are they valuating? Are they business valuating, or are they non-valuating? And it's the non-valuating ones that we have in our sites to try and eliminate if we can. Sometimes we might not be able to eliminate them, but we might certainly be able to work on them. All right, so produces value, valuating activities. The activities that produce value or satisfaction to the customer. So the criteria is the customer willing to pay for this step? Would the customer agree that this step is necessary to achieve their goals? If that's the case, then they're valuating activities. If the step is removed, would the customer perceive that the end product or service is less valuable or that something's missing? In that case, it's a valuating activity. Here's an example again. Order to cash process. Okay, so in an order to cash process, then somewhere along the line, an order is placed. Now, what happens in between when an order is placed and we actually receive the cash for what we've done? A few things might happen. Confirm the delivery date might be one of the things we do, and deliver products. If we have a university admissions process, for instance, we talked about this last week, we need to assess an application and then we need to notify the admissions of the outcome. Just to be clear, when you ring up and confirm a delivery date to the customer, that's a necessary step for the customer. Okay, so that's a evaluating step. When we deliver the products, that's obviously evaluating. When we assess an application, okay, is it evaluating for the student? Yep. When we notify admissions of an outcome, is it evaluating for student? Well, it's either evaluating or business evaluating. No, sorry, it's not business evaluating, it's actually evaluating. Right, now, when we talk about business evaluating are steps which are necessary, useful in order for the business to do what it has to do. Now, some of these the business evaluating steps, the customer may not perceive to be evaluating from their perspective, but as a business, we have to undertake them in order to add value to the customer in other steps. So the criteria here is the step required in order to collect revenue. So obviously that's not evaluating from the customer's perspective, but it's certainly business evaluating from our perspective. You know, so we need to collect revenue in order to grow the business. So any step involved or directly related to that is business evaluating. Would the business potentially suffer in the long term if this step was removed? Does it reduce the risk of business losses? Is the step required in order to comply with any regulatory requirement? So for instance, if you're a business and you have to report to the government every month, then it's not evaluating from the customer's perspective, but it's something you have to do as a business to stay in business. Therefore, it's business evaluating. Some examples of this would be the order to cash process. Okay, checking a purchase order. Now, from the customer's perspective, they've ordered something. They've raised a purchase order. And if you want to check that against an invoice, then that's not, from the customer's perspective, that's not evaluating, but it's certainly business evaluating from your perspective. Check the customer's creditworthiness. Again, not evaluating for the customer, but it's a step which might potentially result in loss to the business if we don't undertake that step. So if the customer's not creditworthiness, you don't check their creditworthiness, you extend them credit, they don't pay, you've lost as a business. So this is business evaluating. Issue the invoice, again, business evaluating, collect the payment, and collect customer feedback. Those steps aren't evaluating from the customer's perspective, but they're business evaluating. And again, back to the university admission process. If you're verifying the completeness of an application, you're checking the validity of degrees, you're checking the validity of language test results. These are certainly not evaluating from the customer's perspective, which is the student, but they're business evaluating from the university's perspective. So everything that's not evaluating or business evaluating are non-evaluating activities. And this includes handovers or context switches, waiting times, delays, rework or defect correction. All those are non-evaluating activities. And we want to reduce them, reduce or eliminate them if possible. So for examples here, we go to an order to cash. When you forward a purchase order to a warehouse, okay, so a customer has ordered something, they've raised a purchase order, and then you forward that purchase order to a warehouse. Okay, the actual act of forwarding it to a warehouse is not evaluating from the customer's perspective. It's not business evaluating from our perspective. It's something that has to be done, so it's got to be taken to the warehouse in order for the goods to be picked off the shelf. But so it's not business evaluating, but it has to be done. So it's a step, that's one of those steps that we can't eliminate it, but we might be able to streamline it. So it depends how it's undertaken. So you go back about 20, 30 years, for instance, then you might have somebody in an office actually pick up a bunch, they might batch purchase orders over a day or a couple of days, and then they might physically take them down to a warehouse. Now that's non-evaluating. Now we can streamline that by sending them by emails or sending them via a workflow system. If you can do that, then you're streamlining it. You're not totally removing it, but you're certainly targeting that for some sort of rework. When you resend a confirmation, again, not business evaluating, it's non-evaluating, or you receive rejected products, they're non-evaluating to your business. How do you eliminate receiving rejected products? Well, you can't eliminate it completely, but you can target it for rework. Maybe if you're receiving rejected products, that might feed back to other business processes. You might improve the efficiency of your manufacturing line, which then will reduce the need for rejected products to come in. But it's certainly non-valuating activities which need to be looked at and targeted. From a university admission perspective, forwarding applications to a committee and receiving admission results from a committee, they're non-valuating steps. Now again, can they be eliminated? Maybe not eliminated completely, but we can certainly look at streamlining the way this is done and maybe saving time on those steps.
The Victorian Institute of Technology has other great videos covering many different topics. Please check them out, and thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe the video for more great content like this.